Hi, everyone. So, today we're basically just going to be enjoying everything that we can learn about ants. We'll be talking a bit about things that ants, the daily life of ants, um, just a broad spectrum of knowledge about species, about different activities that they do, just a great bit of what we can learn in just a few, maybe hopefully we can reach an hour or two of what it's like to have ants in your life. A lot of ants, almost all ants have a very steady diet of a few things, mainly being um, carbohydrates and proteins, which is just the main staples of almost any ant species. There are a few that stray away from this sort of template, I guess. But for the most part, that's the main staple of ants' diet is carbs and proteins. Um, Another interesting thing about ants and their feeding habits is that they typically feed each other through a system called trophallaxis, which is just a scientific way of saying mouth to mouth feeding. So I mean, you just imagine chewing up your food and spitting in your loved one's mouth. So that's basically what that is. um, and almost all ant species do it. um, they have two different stomachs. They have a social stomach for the trophallaxis so that they can feed each other. And then they have a digestive stomach in which they actually, digest and enjoy the food that they're eating like that. Um, and it's exactly what you imagine it to be. They just shoot food in each other's mouth. Um, Moving on from that, another main staple, another big thing that almost all ants share between each other is their social living space. They lived in a very socially structured hierarchy. You got your queen, which for most colonies there's only one, but that in some cases there's as as many as hundreds of different queens in a colony. Few species of ants that do this. Pavement ants, sometimes uh, leafcutter ants will do this. Um, Yellow crazy ants will do this. So the one of the great things about ants, and one of the things that makes them so exciting and interesting, is the fact that there's so much diversity in them. You can think of almost any niche of the jungle kingdom, any niche that an ant could fill, and there is a high likelihood that they have filled that niche. Um, if you want to consider it, there are species of ants that do mostly farming, if you would believe it, or I guess you could say more like herding. There are species of ants that, or actually a good amount of ants that enjoy the honeydew that's produced by aphids. It's just a great source of those carbohydrates, and ants just can't get enough of it. And they're even known to herd some species of aphids. They'll take off any sort of wings, any mobility, and then kind of just carry them around from where they want to go, so that they'll always have that supply of honeydew, always have that supply of food, nourishment, and really just have a general enjoyment of life. It's almost like how we use cows for their milk. They just use it for their butt juice. So if you really want to get into it, you can also think that ants are a lot like a human society. There's so many parts of it that have to work together, and if they don't work together, then society breaks down, basically. There's so many different similarities between our society and the way we structure things and an ant society and the way that they have things structured. There's always someone in command that is, the top dog, and shit rolls downhill. Oh yeah, and at the very end of the video, I'm not sure if I brought this up, we'll even discuss about how you can keep a ant colony of your very own to care for from a queen, and have it as what is considered amongst invertebrate, I don't even know, herpetologists, invertebrate pet keepers, a desktop pet. And basically what that is just a small pet that's big enough to fit on your desktop. And believe it or not, ants make some of the greatest pets you can have, in my opinion anyways. They end up being very low maintenance. Quite a few species can survive on just the scraps you leave them for food. It's just a great hobby to get into if you're ever interested in ant keeping. That's what it's called. It's ant keeping. Kind of like beekeeping, except that you don't get much out of it other than the enjoyment of watching ants run around in a little container. Which sounds, now that I say it out loud, a little morbid. But yeah, let's start hopping into it. So one of the big species I wanted to bring up, I just kind of wanted to look at first, was the Dracula ant. One of the interesting things about the Dracula ant is how it got its name. So they have these very interesting eating habits, and I explained before that their ants' main diet is carbs and proteins, but these guys take the attainment of proteins to a very strange level. If you really watch them in their colony nests and their eating habits, one thing that a few scientists had noticed, and a certain YouTuber, Ants Canada, he's a great source for all information ants as well. Definitely give him a check out after you're enjoying this as much as you can. Is that these guys have been found to make small little incisions on the larva, and from these incisions they'll actually drink a little bit of their blood, and that's actually how they got their name, Dracula ants. It wasn't something that was recorded or understood before catching that footage. It was more like theorized, I guess. It was a hypothesis. But yeah, no, he definitely got some footage of that exact behavior happening. It's very interesting. It's very affirming to a lot of scientists. I'm sure a lot of entomologists that have actually, been debating whether over that was a natural occurrence in this species of ants. So it's one of those few interesting little facts about these guys. It says here also, another interesting fact is that they have the fastest moving, or they are the fastest moving animal in the world. Their jaws can snap shut at 200 miles per hour, which is 5,000 times faster than the blink of an eye. And that's fucking wild. That means that in the blink of an eye, they'd be able to snap their jaw shut 5,000 times. Imagine blinking 5,000 times before someone finished their own blink. That'd be seizure inducing, I'm sure. Oh, look at that. So ant keeping actually wasn't a very big hobby amongst entomologists or amongst people in general. But I guess a few people have made it interesting. But they even bring it up here that they're in demand by specialized collectors due to their unusual habits and structures. Another real interesting species to have, and I've actually owned one before, Adda. I guess we're just starting off with ants that have the strangest eating habits, I guess. Mainly, insects are the best source of proteins, and honeydew and sources from plants are the best source of carbs. Adda is a very interesting species that took that to a very different level. So what they decided to do, instead of the whole traditional eating insects and collecting nectar and shit, eating bug ass juice, is that they decided to farm their own nourishment. So instead of just the normal, like I said, ass juice and bug parts, they decided to flip the whole game on its head, and they decided to farm their own fungus. And the crazy thing about this is the way that they evolved to do this. So basically what they do is, if you ever see the line of ants that are carrying those like small chunks of leaves, and there's like hundreds of thousands of them just trailing along in these like block long trails, these guys, what they're doing with those plants is they're not actually just digesting and eating them. They're breaking it down, they're crushing it up, mushing it, they're adding saliva to it, and then a lot of people, forego this, but I think it's the most interesting part, is specialized workers in the fungus growing chamber, will actually have a chest plate that has antiseptic characteristics on it. So it kills bacteria. Like they became an alcohol wipe, basically, for the colony. And I think that's fucking awesome. I just think that's so cool. But yeah, because fungus, as we know, is basically a form of mold. It's not exactly mold. I'm not sure if it's exactly mold, but it's a fungus. It's not exactly, the cleanest thing. And a lot of times fungus bring different bacterias, which there is actually a bacteria that's only found in these fungus. And it brings different kinds of parasites and different kind of things. But the ants will rub the leaves before they mush it up with their antiseptic chest piece and clean it off, and make sure that there's no contaminants in it, so that their fungal garden can continue to grow and prosper. A lot of times, if the colony isn't mature enough and they continue to breed, and their fungus garden isn't going so well, these ants can actually die. Because that's their main source of food. That's the one downside to having these ants, and that being your only source of food, is that if that food source is diminished, the rest of the colony kind of goes away with it. So these guys, they really, if you ever, I've had this ant colony before, and I say before, I caught it from a queen, started the colony from just the basics. but they're very hard to care for. You have to always provide them with the right food. You have to always provide them with the right amount of humidity. Really, it's only a species you should take on if you're ready to make that kind of commitment for it. One interesting thing that I forgot to go over, and I thought of this because I see this guy down here, this guy. So this is a male ant. That's a dude. You can tell by its tiny head. So there's another shared piece of knowledge between most ant species is that they have the caste system is that they have the queens, which are called elates, and that's just the female elate. The male elates are typically they're only made. They're called drones. They're not even called kings. They're called drones. They fucking die. That's their life's goal is to nut and die. It's a sad life. It's a sad part of the animal kingdom that it seems like for a lot of invertebrate species, that seems. I mean, I guess if you think about it a lot, that's the life cycle of a lot of things, huh? Is you fuck and you die. So I guess they just simplified that to the easiest form and just took the easy way out and decided to fuck to death. So a lot of times people will think that the male ant is actually a different insect altogether. It's not always a case. It just looks a bit different because it doesn't have the necessities that most other ant species need to really be a functional part of the colony. Like I said, they only got one job, and once they do that job, they die, and that's it. They wait. Well, they don't wait, they die. The colony reproduces more of those guys once it's time for their nuptial flights, which are typically a seasonal thing. One time of year, they'll fly off, group up, and usually it's something that's different between different species. So, summertime, you'll get a lot of Solenopsis, fire ants. Wintertime, you'll get a lot of pavement ants flying around, which I forgot what their special name is, but yeah. So there's a lot of real fascinating things about them, but whenever the male ant is around, typically the rest of the colony knows that they're not going to last long. Evolution knew that they weren't going to last long, so they just made it easy on them. They gave them these mouthpieces that you can see here. They're just tiny. They're not really meant for eating. They're not really meant to do much. They have this huge thorax. So that they can fly however far they need to, but after that point that those muscles are done, he's done. They don't really need to eat because they're not going to be around long. And this is a shared trait between a lot of different species of ants, is that they just know. Evolution knew that they just weren't going to be used very much, so once that sperm deposit is in the bank, that check is bounced. That's one of those shared things between a lot of different species of ants. Yeah, I think I really discussed a lot of what they do. They're just a fascinating species of ant. They really just they cut a lot of leaves. Yeah, actually, that's another thing. These guys are disastrous to the ecosystem. In areas where they're not native to, these fuckers will just level, like, not kidding, they can level like forest. I mean, maybe not a full forest, but given enough time, I'm sure they could. Man, let's think of another great ant species. Last time we were streaming, we talked about how ants actually came from wasps about 150,000 years ago. Almost all ants share the same ancestor with dirt daubers. Um, and you'd think it'd be like some kind of social wasp that lives in like a colony or cluster, or maybe some kind of ant that like actually dwells in the ground, like a cicada hawk or something. But yeah, no, the solitary um, single nest building, um, very docile wasp is the one that the shittiest fucking ants come from. I honestly would have suspected paper wasps, or maybe even bald face wasps would be the top candidates for the evolutionary deviation of ants. But it does seem that all evidence points to dirt daubers, which is fascinating, but not what you'd expect. So let's think of another wonderful ant species. Dinosaur ant. That's interesting. Nothomyrmica, also known as a dinosaur ant. They look a lot like a mix between the fire ant and a Dracula ant. Oh, they're cute. They're chewing on that little heart-shaped thing. This ant was a myrmological mystery for many decades after its description in 1934. This guy has been missing, like, they documented it in 1934 and they just recently rediscovered it or something. Let's take a look at this at antwiki.org. Great place for information about ants. I think this is you can also find ant care sheets on here. But honestly, all you really need for a care sheet is just to know the habitats in which they live in, their main diet staple, and how to keep their area clean. I mean, that's the main thing about any animal that you want to keep happy, is you should really know what it eats, should know how it lives, and just, care for it. After its description in 1934, the original type specimens were the only samples collected until the ant was rediscovered in the 1970s. Okay, so it took like fucking 40 years. Jesus. Besides some vague locality data, the Clark statement about 2,500 kilometer stretch of southern Australia, beyond those collected by Miss Bajou, very few species of ants have been seen from the great stretch of country lying between Albany, Western Australia, and Port Lincoln, Southern Australia. So basically, these are a rare ant species among rare ant species. It sounds to me like they are living in an area where only these fucking ants live. Here's another real interesting thing about ants and their life cycle. Um, and I'm not sure how many people really know this about ants, but they don't just, they're not born ants. Like, they don't just lay an egg and then it hatches out of that. There's actually two different actually used to have this species as well. This is Pseudomyrmex gracilis, a beautiful ant species, very hard to keep. Actually got her to she was eating, she was doing well, but she just didn't want to, maybe I didn't give her enough space. they might grow with the size of their containers, a lot like a goldfish. Um, but yeah, it was such a beautiful, amazing species to have. Um, but you see, that little tiny, little itty bitty speck on the far left of this little picture here, that's the general egg of where they start, and then they slowly grow and grow, and then they start growing little mouth parts in which that they can do that mouth to mouth feeding. That's where the it came in evolutionarily. They needed to feed each other somehow, and ant wasp larvae look a lot like this too. They take that little tiny egg, they stick it on the side of those little paper cones, that little honeycomb in there, put a little egg in there. They just let it grow, and they start feeding it, mouth to mouth feeding, trophallaxis, and eventually they'll get big enough that they can emerge. Same thing here. He'll grow legs. Almost all ants in the colony are women. They're of the female gender, and they will eventually grow their exoskeleton and be able to function and be a proper part of their colony. And there's actually two different forms of this. So what we saw in the other picture, we saw a little thing of their little image of their eggs. Let's see if we could go back to here. And some species of ants have this very ingenious way of hatching. And in short, instead of continuing through that phase at a certain point when they're still larvae, and they've had enough to, I guess, sustain them for a bit, they use a silk. They actually produce a silk in their body, and they cocoonate themselves. And in that cocoon, they'll pupate, they'll go through their metamorphal cycles and emerge an adult ant. And it's almost like you can think of it like how a butterfly will cocoon, although that they don't do the same process of liquefying. They just kind of protect themselves. It's more of a protective measure rather than a casing. So it's really interesting that they can do this. It's one of those amazingly fantastic things that a lot of people don't realize, that it's just another variation and another deeply diverse part of their life cycle. They don't even pupate the same every time, you know. Let's see if we can find a pretty. Oh yeah, let's just look up the Pseudomyrmex gracilis. Not spelling that right. Pseudoscience. Pseudomyrmex is one word. Gracilis. Beautiful ant. Look at her. She's just this wonderful color that has this bright orange and black banding. It's honestly like watching these guys run around is just so relaxing in a way. They just kind of scurry about, and they're just so curious about a lot of things. They're almost like a jumping spider. They're almost like a jumping spider, because they'll stop and they'll actually like almost take in like their surroundings and like really be aware of what they're doing. It just seems like they have their own sentience about them in a way. And just a wonderful insect to own, to watch. But yeah, they do. However, they're different. So there's different types of brooding behavior with ants, and this is so what a brooding behavior is the initial way that an ant will start a colony. Initially, an ant will start the colony with mating. Obviously, they have to mate first, and after their mating, they will start what's called a claustral chamber. This claustral chamber is just a small chamber in which the queen ant will start her colony, and she'll lay a few eggs, she'll hatch a few eggs, and then they don't leave that chamber until they have at least usually like 10 to 12 workers, I want to say, which can take months, years, maybe not years, maybe a full year, especially for the bigger ant colonies, bigger ant species like the Camponotus, the carpenter ants. They can actually take a full year to completely fill out their claustral chamber before they actually start foraging for food. But the interesting thing about these guys is that when an ant starts a claustral chamber and they stay in that chamber, it's a claustral ant. There are these ants, the Pseudomyrmex gracile is a great example, is a semi-claustral ant. And what that means is that instead of them hunkering down in a hole and staying there until they're ready to start life, these guys will go out and they'll forage for food. They'll, like, while their eggs are like at home, they'll go out, they'll forage for food, they'll get their nourishment, they'll come back to their nest, and they'll actually live a more active life in the beginning of their cycle, which is real interesting. A lot of times you can tell the difference between these claustral species and these semi-claustral species because of the that part on behind their head. It's the mesothorax, I believe. No, it's the thorax. It's a thorax, but so there's a head. Immediately behind that is a thorax. That tiny little bump in the middle between the butt and the thorax is a mesothorax, and then you have the gaster. So that gaster is their butt, where most of their organs and reproductives are found. And yeah, so in that thorax is a way that you can usually tell whether a ant is a claustral or a semi-claustral species. And in ant keeping, that makes a huge difference about whether it's what skill level, I guess, you should have before preparing to enjoy that pet. So with a claustral, obviously, they just need to stay in one place. With a semi-claustral, they're very used to being active, moving about, going and getting their food, coming back to their nest. So they need enough space that they can start their colony in a more natural habitat to them. And that's actually something that when you get into the harder ant species, that you'll notice that some ants actually won't start laying eggs and reproducing unless they're fitting very specific criteria. Even like well-known ant keepers have a hard time making sure that these guys can survive long enough to actually have a colony that is big enough to be considered a colony. Um, but we'll get into that a little bit more later. Just know that if you're a beginner, you'll be wanting to look for the claustral ant species, the ones that stay in one spot during their nursing and brooding period. It's just going to be easier. It's going to be cleaner. It's going to be a bit more enjoyable even, because it'll be a lot easier for you to actually view their initial life cycle before you get a bigger container and you might never see her again. So it's just a great way to see and bond and enjoy that ant before it becomes a colony. What I always like to do whenever I get a new ant colony is that I always try to start them from a single queen and grow her eggs, let her grow her eggs, and just watch the whole cycle as naturally as you can in a enclosed setting, almost clinical setting in a way. But it's just going to be a lot easier to start off with a claustral ant versus a full-on semi-claustral ant where you have to figure out ways of giving her enough running and enjoyment areas. But this guy, the Pseudomyrmex gracilis, beautiful ant species, but one of the downsides to these guys is that they have a heck of a sting. The sting of a twig ant, or I guess I always called him graceful twig ant, or I just called him Pseudomyrmex gracilis. I named my queen Ziggy. I also called it elongated twin ant, so those were two that I knew, graceful and elongated. It's native to Mexico and arid parts of the U.S. I found it in, I guess we're in central Texas, so not you can probably find it in other areas around the border and maybe a little past that, because it doesn't seem like they're exactly inclusive to any particular area. It's a solitary ant, so like I said, these guys, they make these small little nests. They don't have a whole lot of workers. They really, and if you're in an area full of like anteaters and shit, like I'm sure certain parts of Mexico is, you probably don't want to have a full ass colony wiped out just because you were noticeable. So I'm sure it's probably like a evolutionary adaptation, thinking that smaller noticeability equals higher survivability. But their sting is crazy bad. They eat just about fucking everything. They're not too picky, but they are. They prefer, what I notice is that they prefer live food. Obviously, most predatory insects, most predatory living things in general like to have live food. So if you do decide to have this guy around, one great source of food, can find it in pet stores, not hard to come by, is caterpillars. They fucking love caterpillars, and it's soft, it's easy for them to eat, it's easy for them to hunt, they move around a lot, so they get the enjoyment of the kill, I guess, like most predatory things are. Like I said, these guys have a great sense of, it seems like, sentience. So if you ever have this colony, it's try to keep them as natural to their habitat as possible, because you can tell that they enjoy it more. Um, Moving on from this guy, let's try to see. It's another most beautiful ants. Ooh, these guys are beautiful. The Australian green weaver ant. It is a gorgeous ant, and you'll see why. They're just this beautiful emerald green color. Like, not even joking. Like, that is emerald green. That is a beautiful ant species. If I'm thinking of the correct one, and I believe it is, these guys will literally fucking weave like these big tents of leaves together. They have a lot like so when I explained earlier that some species of ants. Oh, nice. I love ants. I hope you enjoy the video. Definitely feel free to give a subscribe if you want to enjoy more content like this. Tomorrow we'll be talking about Niccolo Paganini. Niccolo Paganini, the devil's violinist. So stick around for that. And there's your special surprise for subscribing to such a wonderful channel. But these guys, so earlier I described that some species of ants will encase themselves in a cocoon-like structure that protects them while they're pupating. Well, these fucking beautiful emerald green bitches band together, and they grab these leaves, they create a canopy out of it, and they'll grab their little babies and they'll be like, spit on this fucking leaf, spit on this fucking leaf, spit on this leaf. And everybody else fucking pull, and it just pulls it together, and it creates these little like orb tent structures that they hold their entire colonies in. And there could be up to like 10 to 12 different queens per cluster of leaves, and they are a fascinating species of ants that are just a wonderful part of the environment. Honestly, they have these weird little paddle peats. Fuck that, I ain't paying for shit. And these weird little paddle peats, if you can see that. If you can see those little feet, they have these little suction cups, almost like things that, and they hook into the leaves so that they can hoist it and anchor it together. A lot of ant species will also have these little divots in their legs that they use each other to latch onto as well. So a lot of beautiful diversity. There's another beautiful ant. What is that? Acromyrmex. Let's look that up. Versicolor. Whoa. This guy looks like he's a fucking warrior about to go to battle. And it looks like they're a form of leaf cutter as well. So another interesting thing about these ants is that this is a queen right here. That's a queen. You can tell by the wings she has, and the size of her head. They're obviously going to continue to live unlike the males, so they actually need mandibles and parts of their mouth that are functional so that they can actually eat and enjoy sustenance. But another great way to tell if it's a queen ant, if you're still confused, is if they have those giant wings. So once they mate, though, most ant species will actually bend their wings forward and just break those fuckers off. They create these little marks on them called wind scars. All that means is a ripped off wing. It's interesting. I don't know the point of it, I guess. It probably doesn't help to have giant wings on you while you're crawling through tunnels and shit, but usually that's what they are, and that's what they do. They rip their wings off, and that little mark there on their thorax is the wind scar, and that's where her wings used to be. But that is a gorgeous ant species. Oh, there's a cluster of them. Oh, yeah. So see that little one with the tiny head? All those little ones with the tiny head. Those are the males. That's a good representation right there of a male that's about to die. So he got his fix. He nutted, and now he's got his tiny head that he could never eat with. Got big ass wings so he can fly hundreds of thousands of meters to find his nut mate, and then he did his job. Good for him. Congratulations. Actually, give a round of applause for this guy. Good job, dude. Let's see what these guys' anthills look like. I get the feeling that they have an interesting looking anthill. Mounds. Oh, I love those kinds of mounds. See, some ants, they won't have the same kind of mound in which they it's just a hill. Sometimes they'll create these weird structures that cone inward, and basically what that's for is that if they ever have live prey and they're trying to get that live prey into their nest, if it gets loose and it starts scurrying out, the loose gravel on the top there, it makes it hard for them to escape, so they easily just run right back out, grab them, pull them in, and rip them apart and eat his gooey insides. But this is a leafcutter species, so it probably serves a different purpose than that, unless they do still enjoy live prey, which might not be entirely what's the word? It's not something to dismiss, because they this is interesting. How is this? Early life of leafcutter ant colony constrains symbiont vertical transmissions and favor horizontal transmission. What the fuck does that mean? Colonial organisms host a large diversity of symbionts, collectively parasites, mutualists, and commensals that use vertical transmissions from parent colony to offspring, and or horizontal transmission to disperse between host colonies. Interesting. You'll learn something new. Vertical transmission basically just means that it's something that's passed on from the parent to the offspring of the colony, from the parent colony to the offspring. Horizontal transmission, it seems like it's almost like COVID, where you catch it from someone else. The early life of some colonies, characterized by the dispersal and establishment of solitary individuals, may constrain vertical transmission from parent to kid and favor horizontal transmission between large established colonies. I feel like that's, if you think about it, that's kind of obvious. Things are probably more likely to be transmitted from host to host rather than from parent to child, at least colony wise. However, if you think about it, the initial spore that the queen, so this is one of the great things about queen ants, about leafcutter ants. One of the very interesting things is they start their fungal garden from a solitary spore as well. So they're not just sitting there and starting their colony from just this, like, they get a parent spore from the original queen, the original parent colony, and it's just one spore. They take that, and if they're able to start their fungal garden with it and prosper, good on them. They fucking made it. Because if that one spore doesn't fucking survive, if it gets damaged, if it gets fucking dried out, I don't know what fucking can kill a spore, but they can die. And if that happens, that colony just doesn't have a chance at even beginning. So if you want to think about it, that spore is a vertical transmission from the parent colony to the child colony. Just for a quick piece of info, if you want to think about it like that. But we explored this possibility with a miniature cockroach, Adophila fungicola, a symbiont of leafcutter ants, and the mutualistic fungal gardens they cultivate. So there's a fucking baby little mini cockroach for these ants. The early life of a leafcutter colony is characterized by the dispersal of a female elate, queen, carrying a fungal pellet. That's what we're talking about, the single fungal spore, that one little piece. And the subsequent establishment of a foundress workerless queen, raising her incipient fungal garden and colony. Roaches hitchhike on female elates during the leafcutter nuptial flights. Wow. So when they gather together and have these big fuck fests, basically these roaches just fucking climb on the back and just warrior it while they're done. They just hang around, I guess, and wait for the ride out. They just like to watch and take off. But vertically, where were we? Roaches hitchhike on the female elates during the leafcutter nuptial flights. So they watch each other fuck and then hitch a ride, which strongly suggests that roaches are vertically transmitted to foundresses and their incipient colonies. Vertically transmitted, not horizontally. However, weak compatibility between roaches and incipient gardens may constrain roach vertical transmission. So what the fuck is it? Reciprocally, opportunities for horizontal transmission between large established colonies with abundant fungal gardens may weaken selection against roach-inducing harm. We use laboratory experiment, behavioral observations, field surveys, and transmission models to estimate the effect roaches have on the survivorship of the incipient gardens. So they want to know if they're actually causing harm or helping. Roaches harm incipient gardens and predominantly use horizontal transmission between established. So it's like COVID of the leafcutter ants. So these roaches are actually harming the initial garden, um, ultimately cause of generalism associated with infecting desperate stages of a host life cycle. So they attack a weak. I guess they don't attack, but they kind of just infiltrate weak fucking colonies so that they can enjoy the the cost of journalism, I guess. But it seems like they are not a good thing, and they are tiny roaches that are fucking up their gardens. So a lot like a normal person's life, who has to deal with that shit in their gardens. Very beautiful species, very interesting species, very interesting symbionts. Tallest ant mounds. Holy shit. There's gold in them hills. These are termite mounds. That's what I thought. And didn't look like an ant mound. I don't assume they get too big, honestly. I think the biggest ant mound I've ever seen, I'm in pest control, so I get to see a lot of crazy ant shit. I get to see a lot of crazy invertebrate shit. And the tallest mound, which was also the widest mound because it's a fucking mound, kind of comes with the territory. The taller it gets, the wider it's going to get. It's almost like to my knee height, so I want to say probably like 2 feet tall, maybe. And that fucker, it was so crazy. The customer had been complaining, saying that he'd have like several pest companies out to try to solve their issue, and between those several companies, nobody had been able to figure out what his fucking problem was. But he had been dealing with ant issues for years, and like 3 years or something like that. And he was explaining to me that no company was able to figure out what his problem was. And I'm walking around his house, I'm treating the property, getting my job done, and right next to his house I see these 2 fucking hills, and they weren't obviously ant mounds, which was the weird thing. There was like grass growing over them. They were like real fucking tall, like, and there wasn't like ants on it, nor like a few solitary ants kind of just trailing around it. But there was no like definitive entry points, no definitive like signs. And I poked the side of it, and just fucking swarm of ants just started fucking pouring out of it like fucking molten lava out of fucking volcano. And apparently this dude had been cultivating this fucking ant bed for fucking years, and it was getting fucking feet tall, like 2 feet tall, 4 feet wide. This fucker just had a hill, an ant hill, right next to his home. And for years he had been living with it there and never fucking noticed. I don't know how you don't fucking see this growing mound on the side of your home and not poke it and find out if it's the source of your issues. But yeah, no, that was the craziest thing I've ever seen as far as size of mounds go. Let's look up one more ant species here. What's a good one? What's a good ant species? Anyone have any good ideas? There's this multicolored ant species I'd heard of before. Oh yeah. So that's another really cool thing about ants, is that their gaster, their butt parts that hold a lot of their food, it expands. So whenever they eat a lot and enough to expand that portion of their tummy, because how thin the membrane is there, you can actually see the color of what it is that they're eating. Um, so that's always real cool. These guys are these guys are painted for science, actually. Um, that's that's not from what they've eaten. These guys were painted for science. I forgot what their purpose was, but it was a good reason from what I remembered. Man, that didn't help. Iridomyrmex, that's what it was. Let's look that up. Meat ant. So these guys are kind of cool. So the reason why they're actually called iridomyrmex, and it's kind of hard to see from a picture, but they have this really cool, almost like chrome, like iridescent sheen on them. I'm not sure if you can tell from that picture, but it's just this very slight sheen of iridescent coloring, and um, it's just another one of those really cool diversities in ants that you wouldn't really expect to find in nature, but they apparently they're native to Australia. You won't find them here, unless some shit happens and we get more invasive ants. Um, but yeah, they sound a lot like normal fire ants. They're super aggressive. Their colonies grow fucking fast, which is great for an ant keeper. Usually, we love colonies that grow fast. It's just the best thing you can have to have as much fucking possible ants in one fucking box or jar or container you can. But yeah, um, these guys are very pretty. They do the thing I was telling you about, where they collect honeydew from aphids and other such bugs. It looks like these guys are actually, yeah. So they're herding this species of, I mean, I want to say aphid, but it actually looks like some kind of cicada. Um, but maybe aphids look like cicadas um, when they're zoomed in. I could be wrong. But these guys look like, yeah, that they're hurting these bugs and making sure they're not going anywhere. That guy up there in the very top corner and sticking his mouth right up that aphid's asshole, trying to suck out as much juice as it can. Um, um, why are they called the meat ant? Let's. They're omnivores, eating both plants and animals. They forage mostly during the day, collect live and dead invertebrates, and acquire the meat of dead vertebrates. So they actually eat meat. So that's why they're called meat ants. That's crazy. Um, I guess other species of ants do that too. So that's not actually all that surprising. It's not all that crazy, but um, they must eat a lot of it to be called a meat ant. I wonder if maybe it's all that the hemoglobins that's giving them that iridescent sheen or something. But I wonder if they've ever I wonder if they've ever tried to figure out where its coloration comes from. Let's just add a few words. How does Iridomyrmex purpuris obtain its sheen? It's Charlie Sheen. Also called rainbow ants. Excuse me. Iridomyrmex of the rainbow ant, referring to green first described in entomology. It's just kid facts. It's not actually talking about why they have that color. That could be something be interesting to learn someday. I guess we'll leave this this on that question. Just something to think about. Why do these ants have a completely different sheen and coloration than you'd find in almost anywhere else in the insect kingdom? There's few beetles that do have a shining and sheen quality to them, but as far as I'm aware, there's not a whole lot of ants that do it. So a question for you to ponder tonight is, why the fuck does the Iridomyrmex have an iridescent sheen and no other species of ant does? And if you ever find out, let me know. Send me a message and let me know the truth. Before we go, I did promise you I was going to explain how you can have your very own ant colony. And I'll just describe the easiest way. You will actually need to gather a few things for this. First of all, you'll need a test tube. You can get like 100 of these for like $25 on Amazon. You'll need some water and cotton balls. So what you're gonna do is, if you ever find a queen ant and you go through the checklist of what the queen ant looks like and you're for sure it's a queen ant, which we'll go through again real quick: large head, extra large thorax, and large gaster is the main thing of a queen ant. That's a queen ant. That's a queen ant. The big one is a queen ant, and the ones that are trying to rip her apart are actually ants from a different colony. That's why they're attacking her. I saw the video. That's why I know that. The big one with the big thorax, that's a queen ant. But the one to the left there that has a big head but a smaller thorax, his head is bigger than his thorax, that's actually a worker. So there might be a few confusions before you actually start getting it right. But the general idea is, if the head is smaller than the thorax, it's likely a queen. If the head is bigger than the thorax, it's likely a worker. Super major is what they're called. Or I guess a major. So yeah, if it has a big head, has a bigger gaster or a bigger thorax in its head, and a large ass, it's most likely a queen. Another way to tell is that you'd find like little wind scars, that little like damaged part that looks like it's on their thorax. That's another way to tell. But if you want to have a queen, take your cotton ball, rip it in 2 equal size, completely fill until it's brimming your test tube with water. Take 1/2 of your cotton ball, the one that's going to allow the easiest flow of water without allowing it to pour through. That's the important part. You want it to block off the rest of the water. So you're going to put the ball in there, and then it's going to be completely full. So you're going to take a pencil or some other object, and you're going to push it down so you have a good amount of space for water. I'd say like 1/3 of it should be about water, and then the rest should be empty space. And you're going to pour out the water, so that's just going to be empty. You can dry it out with a paper towel, and then you're going to take the other half of the cotton ball, you're going to ball it up, and you're going to make sure that it fits snugly at the entrance. That way they get some air in there. They're not completely trapped without air and ventilation. They'll always have a supply of water and moisture, which is very, very important for the egg and brooding process. The other thing is you're going to want to put it in a dark place for a few months, like seriously, like at least 1 month before you start viewing it every day. And I wouldn't recommend viewing it every day. I'd say only check on it like once a week or so during this phase. One way to keep it still is you can have your test tube rack, just your normal test tube rack, and then you can just set it on its side. That keeps it level, keeps it safe, keeps it together. But this actually isn't a normal test tube rack. This is a specialized rack that has a little cord for a heating cable. This is actually made for ant keeping, but any test tube rack will actually do. You'd want to try to give them a source of warmth if you can. Not exactly necessary for every species of ant, but I'm sure almost every species would enjoy having some warmth. It always does help with the egg laying production and the maturation of the colonies. But yeah, so there you go. That's how you have a queen. We learned some interesting things about ants. We learned some new things. I hope y'all learned some new things today. Yeah, thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you so much for enjoying the stream. If you did enjoy it, feel free to give just subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment, give some love, and yeah, have a wonderful rest of your night. Just continue being curious. Bye.